Hello and welcome back to Hegel on the Beach. We're back on the beach again, and I might be a different colour than I was last time because I got sunburnt dramatically, and I'm with this little fella, if you can see him, the top of his head. So we're in Crosby, near Liverpool, and we're up to the introduction of Phenomenology of Mind by Hegel. I'll be using H.S. Harris's Hegel's Ladder, The Pilgrimage of Reason, which is like a paragraph by paragraph explanation of phenomenology to help me through the book. However, for those of you who've got the book, you might find it in some places, the Harris book, just as difficult to interpret as the original text, but it is useful. Okay, so we're straight into paragraph 73 of the introduction. The first sentence of the introduction says this: "It is a natural supposition that in philosophy, before one gets down to dealing with what is at issue, namely the actual cognition of what, in truth, is, it is first necessary to come to an understanding about cognition." So if we dig a bit deeper, first of all, the phrase, "it's a natural supposition," Hegel's being ironic. It's in understanding the book that it tripwires from the start, from this first sentence. And we've got to be careful that we don't mistake irony for Hegel's own voice, his own intention. Second, Hegel says that it's necessary first to come to an understanding about cognition. So to demystify even further, I googled cognition and came across this definition. Cognition is defined as the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience and the senses. That's from a neuroscience website. And if we go therefore with acquiring knowledge, keep it as simple as we can. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. It's concerned with the mind's relation to reality in theoretical terms. It's the same thing. Cognition's acquiring knowledge, epistemology, theory of knowledge, mind's linked with reality and how we know. So Hegel is setting us up, or rather he's setting up epistemology, or theories of cognition, for a fall. Next bit. Cognition is regarded as the instrument by which one seizes hold of the absolute, or as the means by which one catches sight of it. So Hegel says that theories of cognition, or epistemology, explain how we know in two ways. Way one. For if cognition is the instrument for seizing hold of the absolute essence, then it becomes immediately clear that the application of an instrument to a thing no longer leaves the thing as it is for itself, but rather goes about forming and changing it. If we can only know the world by, this is me now, if we can only know the world by means of an instrument, like an instrument of knowledge, then how do we get to know the instrument? And what instrument do we use on the instrument to check if the instrument's right? That's not to say that instrumental reason is garbage. So we can and we do use knowledge as an instrument. So if I want to go to a location that I don't know in the UK or abroad, and I'm traveling there by car, I can punch in the location in an app and up pops the route. So that is me using knowledge as an instrument, but Hegel's saying it's only part of the truth. It's not the full truth. It's not how we know everything. And Hegel is saying that if true knowledge, if complete knowledge can't be attained through instrumental reason, because we've got to know the reason first, and we can't be sure that the instrument is true. So if I say to somebody on the left, for example, as it's a political sort of video, they think they're in certain possession of the truth because they say they've got an absolutely certain method, like this instrument they're using. It could be the Marxist method, or dialectical materialism, or dialectics, or some form of that, some form of method, historical, whatever. Okay, so they say that they're in possession of a method or an instrument that allows them privileged insight onto the world, more privileged than everybody else. That's why we have a party to do that, and leaders of the party who interpret this, who use this instrument. But how do we know, and how do they know, that the tool or the philosophical device that they're using is any good? How do they know before they know? Okay, so if we're not using cognition as an instrument, we could be using it, according to Hegel, as a medium. So, or if cognition is not an instrument of activity, this is Hegel now, or if cognition is not an instrument of our activity, but is to a certain extent a passive medium through which the light of truth reaches us, then here too, we do not obtain it as it is in itself, but only as it is through and in this medium. Again, there's a barrier, this veil of perception. We don't receive the world as it really is, but as it comes to us after it's been altered by the passive medium. So, you know, as they say in America and astrophysics, Houston, we have a problem about the theories. They don't say this, but they say they've got a problem, and we're saying about theories of epistemology. And how do we know what the world is? Hegel said, if the concern about falling into error sets up a mistrust of science, which itself, untroubled by such scruples, simply sets itself to work and actually cognizes, it's still difficult to see why, on the contrary, a mistrust of this mistrust should not be set up, and why one should not be concerned that this fear of erring is already the error itself. So being afraid to make a mistake because you have to have the perfect instrument or medium, that's the biggest mistake, according to Hegel. Another Hegel quote here. So this fear presupposes representations of cognizing as an instrument and as medium, and also presupposes a difference between ourselves and this cognition. But above all, it presupposes that the absolute stands on one side and cognition stands on the other for itself. So there's a split between the subject and the object. And more later, and maybe in the next video. But it's here we need to talk about skepticism. And how do we even know anything at all? So famously, in his first meditation on philosophy in 1641, René Descartes suggested that everything that we believe to be true might be a deception. He used the analogy of an evil demon of the utmost power and cunning, who has employed all of his energies in order to deceive me. The evil demon is so powerful, he's able to construct an illusion of an external world. So that Descartes can say, I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colours, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely delusions of dreams, which he has devised, he, the evil demon, to ensnare my judgment. So perhaps we can't know anything about the world for certain. So we all know the film, don't we? I mean, let's simplistically, the Keanu Reeves film, The Matrix. The spoon scene. If you Google the spoon scene, you can see a video of it. Spoon Boy goes, do not try to bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth. Keanu Reeves, now, what's the truth? Because he's a great actor. Spoon Boy, there is no spoon. Keanu, there is no spoon. Spoon Boy, then you'll see that it's not the spoon that bends, but only yourself. Okay. So that is the Matrix, which is everything we see is false, and you know, some people have got special powers to see reality as it is. It's like straightforwardly from Plato. So I know that the common defense that if someone punches me in the face, I'll feel it, and that's reality. But again, the evil demon theory counters this by saying that your sensations, the sensation of being punched in the face, might be controlled by an evil demon or by someone from the Matrix. Descartes, by the way, isn't saying that this is like likely at all. He's just suggesting that it's possible. Another version of this is that we could theoretically be brains in a vat. I think there's something in The Simpsons about that. And if you Google it, the philosopher Hilary Putnam has perhaps refuted this. He said there's a contradiction, and that we're not brains in vats, philosophically speaking. But he did write a philosophical paper called Brains in a Vat. So if you get a chance, watch the film Invaders from Mars. I think it's made in the early 50s. And that's got the first and the best picture of a brain in a vat in the movies. It stars Leif Erikson from, he was John Cannon in The High Chaparral. He's a baddie in it. And it's a great film, and brain in a vat, only this one's got a face, a brain with a face. It's wonderful. And another version of the brain in the vat about how do we know that we're not disembodied, you know, circle and a star. Another version of this, like The Matrix, is one by a fella called Nick Bostrom, who's a physicist, and he said that we could be living in a computer simulation. There's an article in Scientific American that gives this the odds of it being true as 50-50. So I don't know, but put it out there. But Hegel is making an important claim about skepticism and how the book will go forward. So how, given that we only know the contents of our own mind, can we know anything for certain about the outside world? Michael Forster, in On Hegel and Skepticism, wrote a book-length discussion on the difference between two forms of skepticism: modern skepticism and ancient skepticism. Modern skeptics like David Hume and people like Brains and Vats. David Hume, who was I mentioned previously, he was the bundle of sensations Hume, the Scottish guy, yeah. He believed that we can be skeptical about the world, but we can have full certainty about our own mental states. And we've got transparency of the mind. There's no veil of perception between us and our own mental states. Now, Descartes, although he wasn't a skeptic, Descartes, he wasn't a skeptic. He introduced the idea of the evil demon. Now that's a device to subject all our beliefs to skeptical doubt. I mean, that's a good thing really, isn't it, to do something like that? We enlightened modern humans, we just don't take things on trust. If the Pope or the Church or a mullah or a religious figure or a political figure says that they are infallible, we, by our modern natures, we just doubt this claim, don't we? We have to know for ourselves. When it turned out that Tony Blair's claim that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which he set out, you remember, in his dodgy dossier, he unwittingly did the methodology of skeptical doubt a huge favour. And we're probably still living with the consequence of that falsehood. Because being skeptical about what the governments tell us, although it's a good thing, that's meant that for many people, everything is doubted. There were a large number of people who doubted that COVID was a killer and so on. Donald Trump screamed fake news almost daily. In fact, according to CNBC, his election lies were amongst his most popular tweets. And the topic he posted about most frequently was fake news. He used this as a weapon for undermining any information prejudicial to his own viewpoint. Therefore, this philosophical debate about skepticism, it's crucial to how we understand politics and the world, particularly today's world. And post-Trump, another example, there were doubts expressed that there were Russian soldiers massed on the borders of Ukraine. They were just there on holiday or training, and France's President Macron, a week before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, told journalists that there'd be no invasion. The West was sort of, the West was misinterpreting this, didn't understand it. There's fake news thrown in there. We also must try to understand that state actors also cynically play upon our healthy skeptical doubt to come up with alternative narratives, lies. I'm talking about Russia specifically because many of us naturally are instinctive and skeptical about our own government claims because the governments don't have a great record on telling the truth. And the popularity of skepticism, it's as amazing now, I think, as it is shocking. We had doubts expressed about the massacres in Bucha and Irpin. Facebook posts disputing Bucha atrocities were shared 208,000 times in a week. Analysis finds the average number of shares was 3 times higher for posts casting doubt on alleged war crimes than those that didn't. So there's a huge audience out there for skepticism in its most extreme form. And I have to say, Descartes, to remind you, he wasn't a skeptic. Even though our senses can deceive us, there is a criterion of truth. Descartes argues that knowledge of our own existence does meet this criterion. For Descartes, we know that we exist. I think, therefore I am. Cogito, ergo sum. Knowledge of our own existence defeats the skeptics, because even if I am a brain in a vat, even if I am Neo in the Matrix, or I'm an ardent Trump supporter and believe the media and the scientific community are in a giant conspiracy with aliens to feed us with fake news and so on, I must exist in order for there to be an I which is being deceived. Therefore, the proposition I exist, I exist, I mean, that's necessarily true according to the Cartesian, the Descartes approach. Hegel was referring precisely to this methodological doubt in his first sentences in his introduction, and he wasn't having any of it. Hegel didn't take everything on trust, but he found ancient skepticism to be a superior method to modern skepticism. And why so? Hegel, in his later work on the history of philosophy, points out that he was heavily influenced by the ancient skepticism of a guy called Sextus Empiricus. Ancient skepticism questions everything, whereas modern skepticism, Descartes onwards, relies on prior belief. Okay? So modern skepticism doesn't question the transparency of the mind. Questioning everything is called equivalence. Hopefully I've pronounced that right, equivalence. It means the suspension of all belief instead of some belief. Ancient skeptics questioned everything as a means to achieve something called ataraxia. It means about being chilled out about all the terrible things that were happening in the ancient world, all the awful stuff. So ataraxia, being, you know, sort of detached and stuff like that, was the purpose they used this particular method for. But ancient skepticism isn't necessarily a negative way to establish what we know. It's a good way, actually. Sextus Empiricus did not say there could be no criterion of truth. He said that the claim that nothing is knowable is in fact an affirmative belief. Instead, Sextus Empiricus says that we should suspend our judgment about whether or not anything is knowable. So he's not saying nothing's true, he's just having a go at dogmatism. And not only Hegel seemed to follow on from Mr. Sextus or Mr. Empiricus, whatever his surname was, but Marx followed precisely this procedure in finding the truth, his search for the truth. Some of you will know that Marx himself used the phrase ruthless criticism of everything that exists. That is ancient skepticism. The advantage of ancient over modern is that modern skepticism, as I said, contains an error. It presupposes certain knowledge. It presupposes the certainty of the contents of our own mind. Modern skepticism demands that we're skeptical about the outside world, but holds that we have absolute certainty of the little voice inside our head. And that's the position of every COVIDiot and conspiracy theorist in the world. Recently, on the news, US conspiracy theorist Alex Jones is now facing ruin for his horrible claim that the Sandy Hook shootings of 12 children were fake news. The evil demon of modern skepticism is a money spinner, and lawyers for the Sandy Hook families demanded that we stop the monetization of misinformation and lies. The idea that we can be certain of our own interior states while doubting everything outside is the same idea that drove the Yorkshire Ripper to kill 22 women. It's the same idea that, you know, religious leaders are infallible, Stalin's infallible, Xi Jinping thought that's infallible, it's taught in schools, so on. There's a funny, I think he's dead now, but there's a funny, serious professor called Robert Fogelin. And he wrote a hilarious essay called The Skeptics Are Coming, which I would recommend that you look at. And it's a great introduction to and a description of ancient skepticism. it's not difficult to undermine this sort of infallible inner sanctum of the mind. Anyone who's ever been on a heavy bender, heavy night of drinking will understand this. There is perceptual variability. Perception varies from one animal to the next. It varies from one person to the next. It varies from one physiological state to the next and one psychological state to the next. So why should we give any particular perspective a privileged status? The claim that we possess a certain kind of knowledge, the knowledge of the self, as I said before, is a type of dogmatism. Pyrrhonian skepticism, the skepticism of Sextus Empiricus, doesn't attack everyday beliefs. The target of Pyrrhonian skepticism, ancient skepticism, is dogmatic philosophy. Modern skeptics, that we don't really have knowledge, we don't possess certain knowledge unless it's bulletproof against all possible counter arguments, no matter how unlikely. And that's just ridiculous. So we can't know anything until we know everything. And Vogelin says, since the Pyrrhonian will suspend judgment concerning the appropriateness of this criterion for knowledge, he will not play the Cartesian game directly. More deeply, since he's not trying to establish strong negative epistemic judgments, the Pyrrhonian has no special need for skeptical scenarios. If you epistemologize in earnest, then you'll be led to skepticism. If you turn to epistemologists for help, they'll provide none, perhaps make things even worse. Therefore, as Hegel said, it's hard to see why we should not turn round and mistrust this very mistrust. Should we not be concerned as to whether this fear of error is not just the error itself? Epistemology is a fool's errand. We can know the truth, and we already do know a lot of it about the world. And Hegel will undermine the absolute certainty of our mental states and put us through a roller coaster of uncertainty. We do come out the other side. But I think this method is very useful to talk about skepticism, and later on Hegel will talk about skepticism. So I'll probably change colour further now because I'm going to get sunburned because of the strong heat. And I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.